Hello and welcome. Today I'm bringing you my video that ties in with the whole 6th anniversary of the Evercade. There's already been a few videos on this by other YouTubers, particularly Crazy Burger, who's been doing a whole series on them. And I don't want to rip off Crazy Burger too hard. So I'm bringing you my highs and lows of the Evercade's 6 years. But the thing is, I didn't get into the Evercade until late 2022, so I missed the first couple of years. But I'll do my best. Now, by highs and lows, I will pick out a favourite and a least favourite cart and game from each year. But also I'll try and highlight some highs and lows of the Evercade's journey as a whole. As the original Evercade released in 2020 during the pandemic, well, that's where I'm going to start. Of course, I wasn't around the ecosystem at the time and I was completely unaware of it. But I'll do my best to fill in the blanks, but there might be inaccuracies. So the Evercade was developed in-house at Blaze Entertainment with the goal of creating a cartridge-based retro handheld that would fly in the face of everything going digital at the time. While the earlier form of Blaze Entertainment had created various handhelds which would use emulation and run whatever ROMs you could add onto them, the Evercade was designed to be a retro system that would have legs. Rather than to be one-off sales where they'd never get anything else again, by selling cartridges for the system it would create a sustainable business model. And I think it's safe to say that it's a move that many people didn't think would work. If I'd been aware of it at the time, I probably would have been one of those people. As when I did hear about it after release, my initial reaction was, why, that sounds kind of pointless. Novel, neat maybe, but pretty pointless, why would I bother? Anyway, the initial concept I believe was come up with in 2018 and was publicly announced, I believe, in April 2019 with a projected release date of late that year, which was later pushed until March 2020 and was delayed again until May 2020, which, as we all know, meant it launched slap bang in the middle of the COVID-19 pandemic, which I'm guessing was a bit of a blessing and a curse. A curse because people probably had less disposable funds, but a blessing because people had more spare time on their hands. Anyway, it launched alongside 10 cartridges: Atari Collection 1, Namco Museum Collection 1, Data East Collection 1, Interplay Collection 1, Atari Collection 2, Namco Collection 2, Interplay Collection 2, Megacat Collection 1, Pico Collection 1 and Technos Collection 1. And these were followed up with 4 more collections, with the October releases of the Xenocrisis and Tanglewood Dual Cart and the Honor Twins Collection. And then late November saw the Atari Lynx Collections 1 and 2. So all in all, the Evercade launched with an initial 122 games available, with around 160 by the end of the year. And even from day one they included indie games in their collections, particularly with the Megacat Studios collection and the later release of Xenocrisis and Tanglewood. It's safe to say that it was a strong start. So I think all of that is a high, really. But what about the lows? Well, delays are a low, obviously. The whole pandemic was a low. There were some rather mixed reviews for the hardware. There was some criticism for the button mapping and the lack of the ability to remap the buttons. And then there was the name, Evercade, which implies arcade, yet there were no arcade games on the system. Only console ports of arcade games and console originals and indie games. So to summarise, the high is that it came out at all, and the low is that it wasn't the smoothest of rides. So as for the cart releases themselves, the pick of the bunch, in my opinion, or the high, is Pico Collection 1. Although not the only cartridge released in year 1 to have 20 games on it, as the Atari Collections 1 and 2 both equalled that number. What separates Pico 1 is the size of the games. There are many substantial games on it, a couple of RPGs, and it has a lot of variety. And while not all of the games are good, in fact some are absolutely terrible, there are a couple of absolute bangers on it, such as the Water Margin, Top Racer and Dragon View. So while it may be a collection of games that you might have rented back in the day, there's enough quality there to make it worthwhile, enough variety to keep it interesting, and enough quantity that you could overlook the games that were just not very good. And to date it is the cartridge that has the most RPGs on the Evercade, so it is a shame that it's a legacy cartridge now. And
the low
for the year is an easy pick for me. It's Interplay Collection 1. The Interplay Collections have the fewest games on them of the launch cartridges. Yes, I know Xenocrisis Tanglewood only had 2 games on it, but that wasn't a launch cartridge. But also both of those games are better than everything on the Interplay Collection 1, because in many ways it's not so much about the quantity but the quality, and that's where Interplay Collection 1 falls hard. Many people are drawn to it because of Earthworm Jim, and back in the day I was a fan of the game, but revisiting it in later years I realised that it's all style over substance and the gameplay was actually pretty horrible. I know many people still consider it a classic, but I learned to absolutely loathe the game, and with that being the main draw, it's not a great cartridge. Sure, Boogerman's alright, Clay Fighter can be funny for a couple of minutes, Incantation is rare, but it's still a very mediocre game, and then you've got Battle Chess and Titan, which really aren't up to much. It's just not a very strong collection, certainly not when compared to the other carts that were coming out the same year, or that came out the same year. So to quickly recap, the high of 2020 cartridge wise was Pico Collection 1 and the low was Interplay Collection 1. So let's move on to the individual games, starting with
the low.
Now for me this is an easy pick. It is Magic Girl from the Pico Collection 1. Yep, my least favourite game is from my favourite cartridge of the year. The problem with Magic Girl is it's quite a cute or cute 'em up, shoot 'em up type thing, and in many ways it's just fairly average. What makes it my least favourite is the game makes me physically ill. It has some weird frame rate things going on and the movement gives me motion sickness. Oh, it is awful. Playing it for more than 5 minutes makes me feel nauseous and brings me out in cold sweats and exhausted. So yeah, it's a hard pass from me. So moving on to the game that I think is the high of 2020's lineup, I've got to say Loops from the Atari Lynx Collection 1. Now there's many games that could fit the bill here. There are a lot of good games that came out in the first year, a whole host of classics, a bunch that drew me to the Evercade in the first place, a few discoveries, many arcade classics, or ports of arcade classics, but Loops is the game that I've played the most. And yeah, it's not a great looking game, it's functional, it has some good music, and the core gameplay is relatively simple. Rotate the shapes, build as big loops as you can, and so on and so forth. But while playing it as part of KD's challenge, I went from thinking it was just an okay game that I couldn't really be bothered with, to getting fully addicted to it. And by addiction means it's the high spot of 2020. Of course, there are many great games that came out, be it classics like Asteroids and Missile Command, or Pac-Man, or classic racers like Top Racer, and indie games like Xenocrisis, Tanza and Tanglewood. 2020 was a strong year. Blaze came out swinging. Although not everything hit the mark, and I doubt many people, even Blaze themselves, really expected it to be going 6 years later, it is. So moving on to 2021, which I imagine was a big year for Blaze in terms of proving what the Evercade could be, and where they started to find out whether it would actually have legs. As you'd expect, a number of cartridges were released, including the Jalico Collection 1, Indie Heroes Collection 1, Pico Collection 2, Worms Collection 1, Codemasters Collection 1, Megacat Studios Collection 2, Intellivision Collection 1, Bitmap Brothers Collection 1, Data East Arcade 1, Technos Arcade 1, Gelco Arcade 1 and Atari Arcade 1. And yes, 2021 was the year when Blaze put the arcade into Evercade. It's also the year they released the Evercade VS, their first home console, as opposed to it just being a handheld. The Evercade VS brought some changes. The controllers for it had 2 extra buttons, an L1 and L2. It introduced Wi-Fi connectivity to make updates easier. And I think there's some UI updates as well. Now I'm not too clear on exactly what was introduced when, as this was before I got into the Evercade. I'm also not sure how these firmware updates affected the original Evercade console, or handheld rather, as I've never owned one. Anyway, as I wasn't around the Evercade ecosystem at the time, I can't say too much about the highs and lows, but I'll speculate as best I can. So I'd imagine
the high
would have been the launch of the Evercade VS and all the changes and things and the effect that had on the ecosystem as a whole, and the introduction of the arcade line as it launched alongside the first arcade collections. Conversely,
The low
also ties into this, and that is the confusion around the Namco Museum collections. As for licensing reasons, they were only licensed for handheld devices and they wouldn't run on the Evercade VS. I also believe there were some shipping delays with the VS, but I'm not really au fait with all that, so yeah, that's just one of those things that I can't really comment on fully. So let's look at the cartridges, and this time I'm going to start off with
the low.
And this one was a pretty easy pick for me as I have no nostalgia for the games, and that is the Intellivision Collection 1. While it does have some good games on it, they're not ones that are really to my taste, and I think even the very best games on the collection are just good rather than great. Games like Astro Smash, Buzz Bombers, Shark and Thin Ice, they're fine, they're quite fun, but generally I found the gameplay would go on for a bit too long and start to drag on. And then you've got games like Frog Bog, Snapshots and Word Rockets, which were basically pretty useless. The thing is, that's my pick and it's personal preference. I like most of the carts pretty damn well from 2021, but I'm sure others might have some very different picks, such as the Worms Collection 1, or Pico Collection 2, which is very sports game heavy, or perhaps even Atari Arcade 1, as when it released, a few of the games didn't really work very well. Patches to the games or to the Evercade hardware since has made them more playable, but when it launched it wasn't great. Now when it comes to
the high,
picking a choice was much harder, as there's a few carts that drew me to the Evercade in the first place, and ones that I really enjoy. Ultimately I've decided to go with Data East Arcade 1. It was one of the carts that I got with my Evercade, as I picked up the Evercade VS premium bundle that came with Data East Arcade 1, Technos Arcade 1, and I also bought the Bitmap Brothers collection alongside it. Anyway, what makes Data East Arcade 1 so good? It has a good mixture of games, ones I've got a huge amount of nostalgia for, such as Bad Dudes vs Dragon Ninja, Sly Spy and Tumble Pop, and some discoveries such as Burger Time, Wizard Fire and Gate of Doom. It's a collection I really like, and perhaps part of this decision is informed by the fact that it was the first collection I really started to sink my teeth into. So let's move on to the highs and lows of individual games, and this time I will start with
the high,
and that's going to be the Chaos Engine from the Bitmap Brothers Collection 1. Now I had played the Chaos Engine on the Amiga and on the Super Nintendo before getting the Evercade. And it's a game that I wanted to like, but I found a bit difficult and never got that far on into it. But using save states, it's a game that I managed to actually finally beat for the first time. And I really enjoyed it. I sort of found the joy that I thought I could find back in the day. And since I've gone on to complete it a fair number of times, and I enjoy coming back to it. Part nostalgia, part genuinely enjoying the game, but yeah, it is my pick for the highlight of 2021 on the Evercade, although there's no shortage of other games that I could have chosen. Moving on to
The low.
this one's easy, Uchosen from the Indie Heroes Collection 1, because it's barely a game. It's a shoot 'em up that was made for the NES as part of a game jam and was made in 24 hours, and it shows. It is a barely functional game, there's hardly any gameplay, and it's simply not any fun. I'd argue that it's one of the few games on Evercade that was a pointless inclusion on a cart. I'm sure I can't hail it too much given its origins, but yeah, it's just not one I'll ever play again. So to recap my highs and lows of 2021 on the Evercade, the overall high was the launch of the VS, and the overall low was the incompatibility of the Namco collections on the VS. The cartridge high was Data East Arcade 1, and the low was Intellivision Collection 1. And the games, the high was the Chaos Engine and the low was Uchosen. Overall, throughout 2021, I think the overall quality of the carts was a bit less impressive than in the first year, but the inclusion of the arcade carts certainly added to it and meant that the year ended on a high, even if the early part of the year was a bit more mixed, and included more collections that were more niche in interest, whether they're sports focused like Pico Collection 2, turn-based strategy focused like the Worms Collection, very British, which is less appealing to, say, American audiences, alternatively very American and less appealing to British audiences. But that launch year was always going to be hard to follow. Okay, so let's move on to 2022, which I think had quite a bit of highs and lows. It was the year that Blades introduced the Evercade EXP. It's the year they launched the Game of the Month programme. It's the year they introduced the first hardware locked games. Again, I wasn't really present for it because it was late in 2022 that I came onto the Evercade scene, and I only really caught the tail end of it. So anyway, I'm going to get straight on to
the high,
which was the Game of the Month programme. It was a great idea introducing Game of the Month. It gave Evercade users something to come back to each month. And it started out strong with Tapeworm Disco Puzzle. Sure, not every game was great. Some were pretty bad. I think Game of the Month when I first got my Evercade was Gelatinous Humanity Lost, and that really wasn't very good. But what Game of the Month brought to the Evercade was the engagement, a reason to come back, a talking point for when there's no cart releases or other news, there's something going on. That's as well as acting as a tease for an upcoming cartridge. So moving on to
the low,
for 2022. This is very much a mixed one, but I'm going to summarise it with it being, well, the low being the launch of the Evercade EXP. Now don't get me wrong, I like the EXP, I think it's a good device, but the launch was anything but smooth and there were some shortcomings with the device. But anyway, let's start with the positives of the EXP. It has a much better screen than the original Evercade. It adds an L2 and R2 button. It brought parity to the firmware with the Evercade VS. Tarte mode was quite a cool addition, even if it wasn't great for prolonged periods of play. Including the Capcom games inbuilt was also a nice touch, but that's also one of the downsides, as these were the first hardware locked games on the Evercade, and many people felt disappointed, especially if they didn't want to buy the EXP, they were locked out of these Capcom games. And not being able to play them on the VS was also a bit of a downside. Other downsides of the EXP, well, people complained about the light bleed. It's not something that bothered me. It was there is some, but it was never an issue for me, personally. Many people had issues with the battery life. Again, not something I had. Mine was absolutely fine. I mean, even now it still runs for 4.5 hours without any difficulty. But for many this was not the case. And while you do have a warranty with these devices, so that's what the warranties are for, you can get it replaced and all this sort of thing, it's still frustrating when it happens. Also, the speakers on the EXP aren't all that great. Doesn't really have the loudest volume. And when you factor these things with the higher price points of the EXP, it's not great. Then, of course, you have the people that backed it and the people that ordered the Founders Editions, because a truck full of EXPs was stolen, causing a massive delay in these people, the founders, or the people that ordered these Founders Editions, ended up not getting them until months after the standard edition launched and other people had it. People that backed it had already been waiting for it, and I believe it was delayed before release as well. Well, naturally these people were frustrated, and there were conspiracy theories about it just being a cover-up for a normal delay and this, that and the other, but yeah, wherever you land on that, whatever you think of that, it doesn't change the fact for those people that backed it, it would have been extremely frustrating. But it'd also be frustrating for Blaze, because they had to apologise to customers and resolve the situation, all the while probably losing out on money. I mean, I'd imagine they had some sort of insurance, but they still got to claim it. They've got to deal with the fallout of that and I suppose the bad word of mouth that came with it. It was a lose-lose situation for everyone involved. And that's why I've included the whole launch of the EXP as one big thing, is there's a number of things that essentially led to a bit of a perfect storm. So let's look at the cartridges released and then I'll pick up my highs and lows. So the cartridges released were the Renovation Collection, Gremlin Collection 1, the Morph Cat Collection, Intellivision Collection 2, Jalico Arcade Collection, the Galeco Arcade Collection 2, the Hours Awakening and Cathedral Dual Carts, the C64 Collection 1, Terraplan Arcade 1 and IREM Arcade 1, and there was Indie Heroes 2 that ended up launching in February 2023, although the roadmap for 2022 shows it as a November release. So I might as well start out with
the low,
And once again, this was a fairly easy pick. I mean, there's only a choice of two in my opinion, but the one that gets the nod as the low point is Gremlin Collection 1. And I don't think it's as bad as many other people do, but it's a collection that has interesting curation. And I would argue that there's no real standout amazing title on it. If you like football games, then sure, Actra Soccer might do it for you. Or if you're an Amiga fan, maybe Zool was a draw. The only problem is this was the Mega Drive version of Zool, and personally I don't think Zool was ever very good. I always thought it was a mediocre at best Sonic clone, and the Mega Drive port was flawed. I mean, it's still just about playable, but it's quite irritating as well, with it running overall a bit too fast. What is notable about the Gremlin Collection 1 is that it's a standard sized cartridge, yet it still contains two PlayStation 1 games, those being Actra Soccer and Hardcore 4x4. And then the collection is rounded out with a console strategy game in Utopia, Game Boy puzzle game, and a football management game for the Mega Drive, and it's just not the most appealing collection for most people. In case you're wondering, the other possible pick for the low point was Intellivision Collection 2, as I think most of the games don't really control all that well, although some are quite interesting. What raises it above, there are two games on it, Cloudy Mountain and Tower of Doom, that I think are genuinely excellent, if they're your cup of tea. So moving on to
the high.
When it comes to cartridge releases, well, there's a few possibilities. One cartridge stands out for me, and that is the Hours Awakening and Cathedral dual cards. Both are excellent Metroidvanias. I think what's really telling about this collection is that there's a bit of debate as to which is better. Although many will say Cathedral is the better game of the two, and I can see why it is the larger, more in-depth game. But Hours Awakening is also a fantastic game, with it being an NES port of an indie game released on modern platforms, and the NES port actually being an improvement on the original. It's shorter, but I think also more fun. Getting straight into the highs and lows of the individual games, my pick for
the high
is Impossible Mission from the C64 collection. Now, probably an unusual pick. I don't think many others will choose this one because it's a very strong year. There's a lot of other options. But Impossible Mission was a game that I really enjoyed back in the day, although I never managed to finish it. And finishing it on the Evercade, or actually working out how to do the end game of it, is extremely satisfying. But I also come back to it quite often just to play through it again, getting better at it, and trying to beat it with other randomizations of the map. As for
the low,
when it comes to games for 2022, I'm going to have to go with Auto Racing from the Intellivision Collection 2. Now, I know some people like this, but yeah, this sort of auto racing type thing, it's very basic, it's not very fast, it's clunky to control, and I really don't like it. And to be perfectly honest, there's a few other games from that collection that could also be picked. Anyway, to recap, the high of 2022 was the introduction of Game of the Month. The low was the various controversies and fiascos around the launch of the EXP. My cartridge high was the Hours Awakening and Cathedral dual carts, and the low was the Gremlin Collection 1, with my favourite game being Impossible Mission from the C64 collection, and my least favourite being Auto Racing from Intellivision Collection 2. There's some definite highs in 2022 when it comes to carts. Towerplan Arcade 1, IREM Arcade 1, the Dual Cart, Renovation, Morphcat, and for people like myself, the C64 Collection 1. And there's a few other decent carts, and I think the highs were pretty high, but I don't think the lows were all that low, except for the two carts that I named as the potentials for the low. 2002 was a pretty solid year with some definite downsides, but overall I think the quality was pretty good. Now, as I said, this is the year that I came into the Evercade system. I know I bought my VS before the Evercade EXP launched, but I can't remember exactly how long before. But anyway, that's enough waffle about 2022. This has probably gone on a bit too long, so let's move on to 2023, which was my first full year of the Evercade, and where I really started taking note of when cartridges were releasing and started getting involved in the Evercade community. It was the first year they'd equalled the amount of carts released as in the first year. It was the second year of the Game of the Month programme. It saw the release of the first solo cart for the Evercade. It was a year where there was more indie releases than any other previous year. It was the year of Duke Nukem. and it was the year that the Hyper Megatech Super Pockets were first introduced. So first of all, let's get straight on to
the low
of 2023, and well, there wasn't really any standout low. 2023 was a strong year for Evercade, but there was some release date gaps early in the year and a couple of games with compatibility issues or control issues on the Super Pockets, and a bit more grumbling when it came to firmware updates for the EXP and the VS, and cartridge patches and some cartridge reliability issues. There were some genuine issues and concerns, and it's something that Blaze did work on and eventually get fixed. But for a while there was a bit of talk, there's no getting around that. But I'm not going to go too hard into it because it's not something I've had much of an issue with myself. So let's get on to
the high
of 2023. And I think it's safe to say the high, or highs really, were the showcases that Evercade did during 2023, in particular the one where they revealed Duke Nukem. I don't think anyone saw that coming. I know on the Discord there was one person who made a joke about Duke Nukem, but no one took it seriously. No one thought it was going to happen. And Duke Nukem wasn't the only thing. People were hyped for a number of the carts coming, and I think it's something that Blaze haven't been able to replicate as well since. And I think today the Duke Nukem remasters are still the most exclusive to Evercade games on the whole ecosystem. And people are also hyped for the Atomic VS, which tied in with Duke Nukem, although not directly. When that was announced, I was really tempted to pre-order one. It wasn't the best time for me financially, and I thought, shall I, shan't I? I was ummed over it, but by the time I decided that I would buy it, it was already sold out. You snooze, you lose. But really, I didn't need it. I already had a VS, and that was fine for me at the time. I didn't need anything else. I just wanted it because it looked quite cool. So let's have a look at the cartridges released in 2023. They were the C64 Collection 2, Tower Plan Arcade 2, the Team 17 Collection, Pico Collection 3, Pico Arcade 1, the Sydney Hunter Collection, Sunsoft Collection 1, the Delphine Collection 1, Full Void, Home Computer Heroes Collection 1, Duke Nukem Collections 1 and 2, the Good Boy Galaxy and Witch and Wiz Dual Cart, and the Demons of Asterborg and Asterbros Dual Cart. As I mentioned, it was a very indie heavy year. One criticism that came out by the end of the year, and this is just grumbling on a bit of social media, is that a few people were referring to it as the indie apocalypse and were bemoaning the fact there was too much indie. And I can understand that some people come to retro systems just for the nostalgia fix, so indie won't do it for them so much. But for many others it was fantastic, and I'd count myself included in that. Anyway, let's pick some highs and lows, starting with the
low,
and that is easily the Sydney Hunter Collection, in my opinion. With only 4 games on it, all of them being short and one excluded, none of them being particularly replayable, it just didn't offer that much value. All the games were enjoyable enough, none of them were amazing, although one was, I'd say, very good. But yeah, it was very much a cart that felt lacking. I think I beat everything it had to offer inside of an evening. And I do think that was a very easy pick. I think everything else released in the year was good in some way or another, and Sydney Hunter was just, well, okay-ish. However, if it had been able to include Sydney Hunter and the Curse of the Mayan, an indie game for modern systems, then I think it would have been a stronger collection, as that is a larger, more well-rounded game. Unfortunately, it runs in Unity, and I don't think they could get it working on the Evercade, native or otherwise. So moving on to
the high,
and it's probably a bit too much of an obvious pick, but I'd have to go with Duke Nukem Collection 1. There were a lot of strong carts released. I was a big fan of the Team 17 collection, and the Delphine collection, and Home Computer Heroes, and the Asterborg collection, and Tower Plan Arcade 2, and C64 2. But the exclusivity of the Duke Nukem remasters really hold that collection above the others, I think. Even if the inclusion of Duke Nukem 3D Total Meltdown, that being the PlayStation port, was a bit of a letdown, it's not the best version, but it's a game that I've played and completed before, so I wasn't too fussed. I had never played the Duke Nukem 1 and 2. I was always put off by the DOS platformer thing, the bad scrolling, the hideous colours and what have you. But these remasters absolutely nailed it. The quality and life improvements really kind of made it worth playing it. It gave people like myself a chance to really enjoy these games for what they are, and they are genuinely fun games. Moving on to individual games.
the low,
And this was a harder pick, as while there are a number of weaker games, I don't think anything quite hit some of the lows of previous years. But I think I'm going to go with Gelatinous Humanity Lost from the Indie Heroes Collection 2, which I neglected to mention on my list of games, as I said, originally slated for 2022 but came out in February of 2023. It's just a game that had some potential, but the execution was far too rough.
The High.
There's lots of games to choose from here, there's some really good stuff, but for me I've got to go with the Demons of Vasterborg. I love the game, I'm a big fan of the Mega Drive and the Hack and Slash and Castlevania, and this really just hits all the right notes for me. And it is a game that I've been really hoping would come to the Evercade, so I was really excited when it was announced as actually coming out. Now I can see many might go for Duke Nukem 1 or 2 or Good Boy Galaxy. Maybe even Full Void. There's plenty of games to choose from. There was a lot of good releases throughout the year, but yeah, my pick is Demons of Vasterborg. So looking at 2023 as a whole, it was a very strong year, and many still consider it to be the best year that's of Evercade releases so far. Now I touched on the Super Pockets earlier, and yeah, the Capcom and the Taito Super Pockets came out in 2023. I picked up the Taito ones as I figured the chance of the games coming to carts was fairly low, although it was a device that I wasn't overly interested in because it looked like it'd be a bit small for my liking, and while the screen size is kind of okay, I do find holding it a little bit small for my hands. Yeah, it's a solid device otherwise, but yeah, you don't need to buy everything, and I suppose a little bit of FOMO got me on that one. But it also seems that the Super Pockets were a big success for Blaze, and the release of the Super Pockets could have been the high of the year, as I've seen many people who have been introduced to the Evercade system because they first picked up a Super Pocket. They are a great budget entry point to the ecosystem. Anyway, let's move on to 2024 to see how they followed up such a banger of a year. 2024, I think Blaze had a bit of an uphill struggle from the get-go. How do you top a really strong year? And they teased some big things, but did they manage to deliver? Well, 2024 was the year that the Alpha was released, as well as the revisions of the VS and the EXP, the EXPR and the VSR. It also saw fewer cartridge releases than the previous year, but what's more important, quality or quantity? It also saw the introduction of the Giga carts, more expensive, larger sized carts, as in larger data capacity, to accommodate collections of PlayStation 1 games and things that just need a bit more room. And there's no way that all three Tomb Raider games would have fit on a standard Evercade cartridge. Then I'm going to start with the overall highs and lows, starting with
The High.
and that's going to be the Evercade Alpha. I'm sure some people might not agree with this, but it was Evercade Blaze's entry into the bar top arcade market. Although the most premiumly priced Evercade device, the Alpha is very well made, and to me it made bar top arcade seem worthwhile, as they're things I'd looked at in the past but always dismissed due to having a limited selection of games and generally looking quite cheap. It did actually take me a while to get the Evercade Alpha. I waited over a year before getting one, and for a discount, as I wasn't sure I could justify the cost against how much I would use it. But in hindsight, I should have picked one up sooner and it would have been worth the money. The build quality is excellent and it feels really good to play the games on the arcade-like device. Anyway, the two initial alphas that were announced were the Street Fighter Alpha, which obviously contained a bunch of Street Fighter games, and the Mega Man Alpha, which included two lesser known arcade Mega Man games and a bunch of other Capcom arcade games. I would also count the EXPR and the VSR as part of the highs as well. Well, maybe not the VSR as it was just a paint job, but the EXPR did fix a few of the issues with the EXP, even if it was at the cost of the HDMI out and the inbuilt Capcom games.
The low.
I don't think there was much in the way of lows. I know some people didn't like the choice of games and things so much, but really the main low to speak of would be some of the delays, such as the EXPR being delayed. Although it wasn't an overly long delay, was it a month or two? I can't remember exactly. But it was a delay nonetheless and had a little bit of a knock-on effect. One aspect of this is, for the first time, it seemed that Smith's Toy Store in the UK was going to start stocking Evercade products. And they did, they stopped the EXPR for a little while, but not for long, and I do wonder if maybe the EXPR hadn't been delayed, then maybe they would continue to be stocking Evercade products. Anyway, moving on to the cartridges. Starting with
the High.
And this one was fairly easy, although there was definitely a few contenders. The contenders being the Tomb Raider Collection 1, the Legacy of Kain Collection and Tower Plan Arcade 3. But for me I think Tower Plan Arcade 3 takes it. Perhaps it's because it's the one that I don't have nostalgia for and it really impressed me. And it was one of the first arcade carts to come out in a while. There had been a bit of a drought with there being only a single arcade cart coming out in 2023 and the early part of 2024 having none at all either. With games such as Batsugan, Outzone, Truxton 2 and Fixate, yeah, it's got a lot of classic Tower Plan shooter action on there. Granted, maybe it's not so good for people who aren't shoot 'em up fans, but for people like me, it's absolutely fantastic. And it is often called one of the best carts on the Evercade. So moving on to
the Low.
And it occurs to me I didn't rattle off the list of the carts that came out in 2024. And these were C64 Collection 3, Indie Heroes Collection 3, Sunsoft Collection 2, Pico Collection 4, Tomb Raider Collection 1, Thalamus Collection 1, Legacy of Kain Collection 1, Bitmap Brothers Collection 2, Tower Plan Arcade Collections 3 and 4, Data East Arcade 2, and the Metal Dragon Life on Mars dual cart. Anyway, the pick for my least favourite cart of the year was actually pretty easy, although it probably differs from many other people's, and a lot of that really depends on your nostalgia for C64 and Amiga games. As someone that has them, Thalamus and the Bitmap Brothers Collection 2 hold up quite well in my opinion. So my least favourite collection of the year, or my low, is the Metal Dragon Life on Mars dual carts, as it is by far the weakest of the indie dual carts. Now Life on Mars isn't a bad game, I quite enjoyed it for what there was, but it's short, a little bit clunky, and has a number of heavily referenced assets in it. And Metal Dragon is pretty poor, especially coming a month or two after the release of Tower Plan Arcade 3, which had Outzone and Fixate on it. Metal Dragon follows a similar gameplay style, but does it much worse. And yeah, it's a shame, because yeah, that also has some very plagiarized type assets in it. And that aside, even if you're not fussed about the plagiarism involved, just take them their own right, the games aren't really good enough to warrant it being a dual cart. They're nowhere near the standard of the other indie dual cart games, although they'd been fine on Indie Heroes. A larger collection maybe might have helped, but yeah, as it is, I know a lot of people do like the collection a lot, but yeah, it's a bit of a low point for me. Although I know many people would probably pick Thalamus as their least favourite because the games are quite obtuse, but again, I have nostalgia for them, so different kettle of fish entirely. Again, it's all personal preference, isn't it? So, and you know, this is mine. So moving on to individual games, and yeah, let's start off with
the High,
and that would be Soul Reaver. It's a game I've got a huge amount of nostalgia for. I like the Legacy of Kain collection a lot, but Soul Reaver is always my favourite of that collection. It was my favourite game on the Dreamcast, and although on Evercade it isn't the Dreamcast version but the PS1 version, I think it still holds up well. I'm a huge fan of the story, and it was one of the first sort of truly open, I suppose it's like a Metroidvania or a 3D Metroidvania, but with the way the game streamed data off the discs and everything, there's no loading yet, there's no loading screens, it just streams beautifully. A nostalgia pick, yes, but the other options would have been Tomb Raider 1, the original game, or Batsugan Special Edition. But yeah, I think Soul Reaver takes the high point of the year for me as an individual game. So moving on to, and I'm going to go with Street Sports Soccer from the C64 Collection 3. Probably the worst football game on the Evercade, but on top of that, it's the worst of the Street Sports series that was developed for the C64. It's just a pathetic attempt at a soccer game or a football game, and yeah, it's just rubbish. But there are a few other games I could have chosen. Pico Collection 4 has a couple of real duffers. Indie Heroes Collection 3 also had some really dodgy games on it too, but yeah, I think Street Sports Soccer took the biscuit. So to recap, The overall high was the release of the alpha, the low was some of the delays. The cartridge high was Tower Plan 3, and the low Master Dragon Life on Mars, and the high game-wise was Soul Reaver, and the low Street Sports Soccer. Overall, 2024 I thought was a solid year. I know some people do consider it quite a bad year, especially coming after 2023, but I think a lot of that depends on what sort of games you have nostalgia for. There are folks who just aren't into the 32-bit 3D platformer type stuff, and then oftentimes they're the same people that don't like things like the C64 or the Amiga. But for myself, I think it was a genuinely strong year, and when they turned around and said they had something huge coming, and it being Tomb Raider, yeah, I think they nailed it. Tomb Raider is suitably big. I've really enjoyed playing through all 3 of the games on Collection 1. So yeah, I think 2024 was a strong year, but it's still a bit of a come down after 2023. So finally getting on to 2025, which will be in more people's memory, so I'm going to try and breeze over it a little bit more. But to recap, it is the year that we got the Taito Alpha, some more Super Pockets, and a large quantity of carts, the most in any year so far. Anyway, let's get straight onto the highs and lows, starting with
The low.
And this one is easy, though it's not directly Evercade, and that is the Hyper Mega Tech releases of the Super Micro keychains. I think these were a pretty big miss on the part of Blaze. Well, granted, I wouldn't be interested in a keychain type device anyway, but those who played them generally found that the versions of games they used weren't very good, and yeah, I think these were a hard miss. Who knows, maybe they did sell well, but yeah, I think that'd be the low point. Just something that didn't interest me, and I didn't think really had that much chance of being successful. But who knows? Again, I could be wrong on that front. So let's move straight on to
The high.
And that was the announcement of some of the publishing partnerships they got involved with, such as Neo Geo, Rare, and Activision. Now, Neo Geo is its own thing and self-explanatory, I think, and I know Rare and Activision have their sort of die-hard fans, but what really excited me about those two was the fact they're both owned by Microsoft, and they're not all that Microsoft owns. It's a deal or deals that potentially opens the door to a lot more games and interesting stuff that I would really like to see come to the Evercade. But anyway, like I said, this is all fresh in memory. I'm probably not telling you anything you don't know, so I'm just going to go straight on to the cartridge highs and lows. But first I should rattle off all the cartridges released in 2025. We have Indie Heroes Collection 4, the Broken Sword Collection, Atari Arcades 2, the Tomb Raider Collection 2, Gremlin Collection 2, Windjammers Carnot and Friends, Neo Geo Arcade 1, 2 and 3, Roguecraft DX, Taito Arcade Collections 1 and 2, Rare Collection 1, Activision Collection 1 and the Llamasoft Collection. So let's start off with
The low.
And this was a tough pick, because although there's a few carts that excite me less, they actually turned out to be quite good in some respects. So ultimately I'd have to say that my least favourite collection of the year would be the Llamasoft collection. I actually like a number of the games on it, but there isn't a lot of jank. On the plus side it has 27 games on it, but I would say there's far more on the collection that falls into the category of hot garbage than there is genuinely good games. But I want to point out that although this is the low point or the weakest cart overall I think, and generally had the weakest reception, there's people that absolutely love it and people that absolutely hate it. I'd say there's less people or fewer people in the middle like myself. But moving on to
The high.
this one's also tough, but I think I've got to go with Neo Geo Arcade Collection 1. Now, I was passingly familiar with a few Neo Geo games before Neo Geo came to the Evercade, but I hadn't really taken to anything to any great degree, so it's the first time I really dug deep into it. And with Neo Geo Arcade 1 being the first one to come out, that is the one that really, I suppose, did it for me the most. Anyway, I've always really liked my fighting games, although I'd gone off them a bit and there hadn't been many good ones on the Evercade previously. All of a sudden we're getting a whole bunch of really good ones, and the Metal Slug games are fantastic as well. But other carts of note, I mean Roguecraft DX, I actually love that as well, and Taito Arcades 2. Hell, I like seeing the Gremlin Collection 2 come out, and Broken Sword. I said there's a lot of stuff I really liked this year, and although I'm not so hot on Rare as many other people, I really appreciated getting some of the Spectrum games from the Ultimate Play the Game days of Rare. Anyway, let's move on to some individual games, and I'll start with
The low.
And to be perfectly honest, there's quite a few good choices here, or bad choices I suppose. I think the one that's annoyed me the most, that would be Collie Defense from the Indie Heroes Collection 4, as it's just a very bad tower defense game made for the Game Boy Advance that basically feels like a vertical slice for a game yet to be made, as opposed to a whole game in its own right. Sure, the Llamasoft collection has things like Deflex V and Andy's Attack, which are just pretty rubbish, or not to mention Ratman, and Atari Arcade 2 has Fire Truck, which is just painful on the Evercade. But yeah, I think Collie Defense takes the prize. So let's move on to
the high
of individual games. And I've got to give that to Garou Mark of the Wolves, which is essentially not Final Fantasy, Fatal Fury 5 or whatever it is. I wasn't a big fan of the early Fatal Fury games, but Garou Mark of the Wolves is probably one of the best 2D fighters ever. Certainly one of the best I've played. It's definitely up there with the best of the Street Fighter games, and for me that's high praise. Absolutely fantastic graphics, really good game mechanics and controls, and a roster, all that's slightly more limited than some of the other fighting games on the Neo Geo collections. It's very tight and balanced. Yeah, just a brilliant fighting game. So overall, I think 2025 was really good. I mean, there's things I haven't mentioned. The release of 2 more Super Pockets, with the Neo Geo Super Pocket and the Data East Super Pocket, which include an improved D-pad. The Taito Alpha also seems to have gone down well. I feel like I'm missing something, but again, recent memory, something's blurring to this year. But I think it was a very good year overall. As I said, I haven't really spoken about Roguecraft DX much, and I really enjoyed that game. I actually had some quite successful videos on it, and it's nice getting some feedback from the developers of the game on that video, or one of them. I think 2025 was a really good year, although it had a slightly slower start and some of the carts maybe missed the mark a little bit. The general standard I think has been high, although I did very much find myself missing the indie collections. Yes, we got one with Roguecraft DX, but it was the first year since I've been into the Evercade they haven't done Game of the Month, and they replaced it with Highlight of the Month, which was fine, with them highlighting some of their older carts and things, but it was a bit less engaging and interesting. I also think that it was a good move on Blaze's part, as some people were, I suppose, feeling a little bit burnt out on Game of the Month and weren't really seeing what was good about it so much, and the break has reinforced that interest, meaning that everyone's much more excited for Game of the Month now than they were back in 2024. So finally, I suppose I should touch on 2026, or this year. I can't really rank the highs on those because we're not done yet. In fact, I'm not going to touch on highs and lows. I'm barely going to say anything, because what's the point midway through? My early favourite when it comes to carts is very much the Turrican collection, although Taito Arcade 3 was really good. It was certainly a strong start to the year. Now we have had another Activision collection, and we've got another one coming soon. And I think that's maybe the low point of the year, having the 2 Activision collections in close succession, as I'm not a huge fan of them, but at the same time I can see the point of why they've done it. Get them sort of done out of the way, because people knew what's coming. They can save the surprises for later in the year. And I suppose I could say what the high of the year is, and that will be the announcement of Doom. I know many people are excited about Banjo-Kazooie, but it's not a series that really interested me. And of course we've got the announcement of the Nexus, a larger handheld with analog sticks, which I predicted was coming. It seemed like an obvious move, and yeah, I think it'll be a great device. Let's hope it lives up to what they're saying. I'm also looking forward to Neo Geo carts returning. I know some people are feeling a bit burnt out, as we had a few in quite close succession at the back end of last year, but I think it's about time. I feel enough time has passed to do more. Anyway, yeah, not too much to say about this year. Like I said, we're part way through and we don't know what's coming. It's great to be getting Game of the Month back, and so far we haven't had any blue carts this year, but from what I can gather they are coming. And with the announcement of these home computer handhelds in partnership with Retro Games Limited, you have to wonder if it has any effect on the future of blue carts. But from the rumblings I'm hearing, which don't really tell me anything, I take them all with a pinch of salt, but it sounds like that it's not going to have much, if any, bearing on Evercade at all, as in the cart releases or the blue line. Because if I could say one thing which I do think is a bit of a downside of 2025 and 2026, is that with getting all these bigger licenses, which is good, it's good for Bays, and there will no doubt be a sales draw and everything, but the downside of it is these things are a bit more familiar. They're less exciting to people. There's less discovery at the moment. So I very much hope that we do get more blue carts and we get more indie, and hopefully some more sort of red carts of or arcade carts of some slightly more obscure stuff and rarities and things that keep it interesting. But who knows what's around the corner. But to finish up, if I was to pick a high and a low from each year and all their releases, I think 2022 would be the low. It's the one that just had a few more problems and a bit more teething troubles. But 2023 would definitely be the high. As good as 2024 and 5 have been good in my opinion, I think 2023 is yet to be topped. Anyway, I'm sure at this point this video is going to have gone on for way longer than my average video. So thank you for watching, especially if you stuck around to the end, and I'll see you in the next one.